Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the best movies of 2017. Now, this is my annual top 10 list of movies that I saw within the previous year. And I didn't see as many movies as I normally do in any given year since I had a kid, and that cut down on that a little bit. But I saw pretty much all the stuff I wanted to see. There are a few exceptions. You always miss some things, but I think this is semi-complete. I think I did about 60 2017 movies, but I think I saw most everything of note to a degree, and I feel good about 2017 in terms of reviews. I know it was a weird year for this YouTube channel, but a big year, a nice year, and a weird year. There are a lot of films of this year I really loved and that really inspired me and that were huge hallmarks and huge things that I won't soon forget. I don't know if this was necessarily a great film year. I think in certain regard you could say that, but I think as someone who still went to the theater regularly, I didn't see that as much like when I saw stuff. It felt like there were times where there weren't really great things out there to see, and then there are other times where I felt like I was seeing a lot of wonderful stuff. So it was really kind of a very mixed bag of a year in the broad sense, but I still am happy with this year overall. I just don't think it's like a great movie year, but I still saw a lot of really great movies in it, which I think most years it's very hard to find a year when movies existed where there hasn't been at least a few good ones, most of the time at least. Anyway, before we get into the nitty-gritty of my kind of top 10 list, I wanted to do my honorable mentions, and these are films that in at least one of the movies' case almost got on here. So these two movies are films that I will probably definitely remember from this year, films that still stuck out for me, even though they both actually came out in the summer, and they're kind of two bigger summer movies actually. One is Spider-Man Homecoming, and the other is War of the Planet of the Apes, and those are, I guess, the two honorable mentions. I think two of the better, probably the best summer blockbusters of the past summer, I would say. I think this top 10 list might be a little different in certain regards, but is sort of the same thing in that there are 10 movies there, so that's not too different. If you're like, hey, where was this? You can just say I put it on there and not complain about it, but I'm sure you will anyway. I think this kind of shows the eclecticness of this year and the eclecticness of movies I saw, or how eclectic this movie year was, but also just kind of reflects my movie year, I guess. This to me represents the movie year that I witnessed in 2017, and I hope it will for you, or at least you'll sort of see where I'm coming from or something. Alright, so let's go into it. Here are my top 10 movies of 2017. At number 10 is Good Time. You couldn't have Good Time take place in modern day Brooklyn or Queens, in the areas that they probably used to make these movies in during the 80s. You have to go to the outer boroughs. You know, the thing about New York is there's all this stuff in the boroughs that people really don't go to, that are seedier and maybe a little more dangerous and pretty much forgotten. And Good Time takes place in that kind of New York, so it's not like trying to make a New York that doesn't exist anymore, do movie New York. They're really taking advantage of a location that's no one's taking advantage of. Right when you thought you couldn't make a grimy, gritty New York crime movie, Good Time is like, well, you actually could. You just need to, drive 10 more minutes that way. The beautiful kind of lights of dark New York, and especially the New York that most of us kind of just drive through when we're going to the airport or something, and just thinking about all the various lights, street lights and car lights and house lights going throughout it, and thinking about what's all in there. And it's like Connie kind of runs through it like he needs to find, and he thinks he can find something. And I think that's just like one of the things I really loved about how simple this premise is, but it just opened up so many different avenues and goes in different ways. That what this film is so genre, it's not thinking about genre perfection, it's almost thinking about the messiness of genre. It doesn't have a nice compact ending. It moves in certain ways that are odd, and it has kind of its own flow while going through this one night adventure. It has fun with that. It has fun in its kind of genre-ness and plays in that, and it's fine with that, and I sort of love it for that. But I was so within it while it was going on. I was surprised by that. There's not a lot of films that can grab you and just grab grab you into them. At number 9, and I never really thought I'd put a movie from this director on my top 10 list, but it was really good, and I kind of was like, well, I guess I sort of should if it's like a good movie, despite me thinking. Normally he's too pretentious for words. And not being as big into Christopher Nolan as most people, but I still have to admit that my number 9 movie is Dunkirk. What makes Dunkirk, I think, so special, really, is that what it does is it makes a Christopher Nolan war movie. It feels like a Christopher Nolan war movie. Dunkirk has that kind of propulsiveness, that energy to it. It feels like a real thrill ride, but it also gets you invested in this conflict. Now, not invested in characters. This film isn't a film about character, it's about the event itself. And I think that's actually one of the smartest things Christopher Nolan did with this film. It lets him get away with all his kind of artistic nonsense, which actually works fairly well for the most part, because he does something that I think is probably smarter than most historical kind of biopic-y Oscar bullshit movies. And that's the fact that every time I'm watching them, they always stop and have a section where they kind of talk down to me and tell me some information just so they make sure I know this thing that happened in real life. And they don't adapt the story to make a good movie. And that's what Dunkirk does. But in addition to doing that, since it makes this kind of propulsive, amazing kind of experience, I sort of knew about Dunkirk before, but now I care about Dunkirk. I don't care because you had someone cry on the beach and make a big dumb speech or something. I care because it was an amazing experience, and that's what Dunkirk's trying to do. You can tell in this that Christopher Nolan does really care about Dunkirk, the actual evacuation and everything that happened in it, but he doesn't have a scene with Winston Churchill. You don't even see the Nazis, really. I mean, you do, but like, you don't see the Nazi symbols or anything like that. It's kind of really interesting how he really stays to the point on this, especially a filmmaker who his last 2 films felt like maybe he should have cut things down. This feels very tight and compact for the most part, which is like honestly amazing. You don't see filmmakers get a little more economical as they have more power. Number 8 is probably the least seen. That might not be true, but yeah, it might be. Probably least seen and film people are least aware of all the movies on my top 10 list, but it was a film that I really liked and probably one of the best zombie movies I've seen in quite a while, and that would be The Girl with All the Gifts. I rarely see a science fiction film or a zombie film or a horror film with as many ideas and as much going on as this film does. It was fairly clear to me very early on in this film that this was probably one of the great zombie movies of like maybe the decade. It's just wondrous in how classically science fiction in terms of its ideas and all the philosophy within it, while also being a really awesome survival zombie film with also lots of world building that goes on all throughout it. It slowly tells you about this world. It doesn't immediately hit you with it. It is very much a thinking man's zombie film, a thinking person's science fiction film where you're going in and you know that there's these ideas there, but it's also trying to do a well-told zombie film in the best sense of the word, in the sense of things like Dawn of the Dead, or even reminded me a little of Day of the Dead, frankly, and the idea of generational things and where humanity fits in and whether humanity should survive, or if later generations should survive, or how you will treat people when you are in this sort of a situation, and in ways that actually makes you think about those things and deal with those things, and reminds me of the greatness that science fiction and horror can achieve when talking about such ideas while also making an incredibly entertaining and depressing statement all at the same time. And number 7 is The Post. This feels like a thriller. This feels like an important journalism film, but this also feels like a populist movie. There are parts where the audience members are clapping and cheering, and that's not because I live in liberal New York or something. That's because the movie flows in that way. It moves in that way. It wants the big conversation piece when somebody says something important to make you stand up and cheer, and there's no one who can do that better than Steven Spielberg. He can take something that's about some kind of a piece of journalism, about a 700-page report, and make it feel as real and as important to you as kind of one of his big blockbusters. And as much as you want to talk about how he represents what Hollywood became and this big kind of popcorn, you know, roller coaster ride type of movie, he brings all of that skill to something like The Post, and it is so enjoyable. I rarely see biopics that are this populous and this good. This is mainstream Hollywood filmmaking running at all cylinders and being the best it can be. This is a very fun journalism film. There's no substitute, and he knows how to do that. In a way, he's made kind of one of the best journalism films to come out in recent memory. Whether a newspaper should do this, the idea of should the public do this, the idea of journalism, the importance of journalism, the hunt of journalism, the hunt of creating something and getting everyone involved and doing something quickly, it's all within The Post. This is a film that understands the importance of what it's talking about, but also understands that filmmaking is an important thing as well. And making a populist movie about something important might be maybe more important than just blandly making something about something important. I've always been a fan of this director, but I've always been so wowed by everything Paul Thomas Anderson has done, and I think this film is no exception and a worthy piece of his filmography, and I think probably the closest to a follow-up to Punch Drunk Love that he's ever done so far, and that would be my number 6, which is Phantom Thread. Phantom Thread is a interesting Paul Thomas Anderson film in that it starts in such a classy, slow, methodical, what you're used to thinking of a period kind of European film. At first, I thought, well, this is interesting, but it's not maybe what I love about Paul Thomas Anderson, because it almost lulls you into what it is going to be, because it almost feels like when they begin the relationship, this is something he's done before, and she will be as disposable as all those women are, and I think she thinks that, but as the film goes, you get this kind of passive aggressive kind of romantic comedy, which is like super weird but super hilarious. I mean, this film is very classy, very beautiful, very kind of grown up, but it also is very funny. I laughed quite a bit. It's probably one of the funnier relationship movies I've seen in a while. Okay, so we're on to the top 5. The top 5 best movies, according to me at least, of 2017. The 5th one is a film that felt very real, felt very intense, almost had this very documentary feel, had a very kind of foreign language feel, but also had a very American feel. And number 5 is The Florida Project. That feels beautiful and wonderful and joyous and more reminding you of what it was really like being a kid, more than any kids film could ever achieve. That might be why this is like, I think it's a kids film that's rated R. Is this rated R? Anyway, but it really gets to the heart of being a kid and what matters to a kid. Certainly, I think a lot of people, when they talk about this film, talking about the socio-economical ideas within it and how the director Sean Baker is really going into the areas of America that often don't get talked about, and that's usually the poor and the forgotten. And the Florida Project gets into that, but in some ways it does, but it doesn't bring it up in the way that I think maybe Tangerine does, or presumably his other movies, or a movie that would really be pronouncing it. In this way, I don't think the main girl, Mooney, it's really something that bothers her as much as she's accepted this is her life. And the acceptance of that when you're a kid, whether you grow up in suburbia or a city or a farm, you just accept that that's life and you're okay with it. You're joyous about it. It's when you're older that you start questioning, you know, the things that happened when you were that age, or your parents, or the ideas of such. And I think the Florida Project goes into that so amazingly. It's just such a joyous film to see, but it does it so matter-of-fact. You're almost kind of just confronted with just a bunch of kids just playing, and that's a lot of fun to see. There's a real sense of play to this, certainly because there isn't really a structure, I would say, and it does have that sense of play because you never are exactly sure where the film's going to go, what it's going to tell you in one scene and what it's not going to tell you, what it's going to confront you with, how and a lot of times this can feel like a really fun kids movie, and other times it can really hit you with some just real raw emotions that are almost like too hard to take. It might be because you are through that view of a child, and sometimes when you're a child and you're hit with some of these like really strong moments, it is too hard to take. And it's probably one of the few times I've seen a film where the emotion just was so overbearing. I was like honestly a little shocked by it. And I think The Florida Project is one of those kind of films that cannot really be completely tamed, despite the fact that Sean Baker has controlled it and made it work in such a way that he's a very precise, smarter filmmaker than this film highlights in its flow and its interesting structure. He's the kind of director who knows what he's doing with those things and can kind of wield it to say all sorts of wonderful, glamorous things and put you through quite an experience as an audience member. Number 4 is probably a movie that I'm maybe the most sort of emotional about, and I could make a case for it to be my number 1. I chose not to, and I constantly think maybe it should be higher. It's a film that I think maybe I've always wanted, but I don't think that's necessarily why it is number 4, and that is Logan. I think for a long time everyone's wanted a really good Wolverine movie, and specifically a very violent Wolverine movie. The thing that we've always been hinted at through the various films that Hugh Jackman has starred in as Wolverine is it's not too beholden to its plot necessarily. In fact, the plot isn't really what's most important to this movie. What's most important to this film is Logan as a character and Wolverine as a character, as well as X-23 and Professor X and their journey itself, but not exactly what they're doing on that journey. There is still kind of a typical kind of superhero plot kind of thing. This is kind of a character study of Wolverine, and this film works a lot better because of it. Logan came out on March 3rd. I think I saw it the night of the 2nd in the early shows, and it was literally definitely I knew it was going to be the last movie I saw before my daughter was born. I don't know, it was a weird feeling because obviously that film is about that quite a bit. It was a particularly odd movie to see on the kind of precipice of fatherhood, and there was this feeling after I left the theater and I was like just waiting across the street that like, wow, this is like an interesting way to kind of see my life change forever and to have seen that film. And I think that for me, Logan is always wrapped up within. I still think it's the best X-Men movie. I think it's one of the best comic book movies in a long time. I think it's probably the best kind of Unforgiven type film that the superhero genre has made so far and maybe will ever make. But I think it was such a big kind of moment for me, kind of leaving that theater and experiencing an audience not sure how to take the movie. And there's just so much I love about Logan. As time goes on, for me, it'll be a film that's kind of wrapped up within my life, as X-Men was a huge part of my life growing up. And also, I think, obviously, the themes of Logan kind of being wrapped up in my life at that time, and Wolverine kind of dealing with helping out this sort of daughter of his. I mean, it's his clone, but, you know, theoretical, I guess, meant a lot to me and was a story that picked a perfect time in my life. But I also think it's amazingly well made as well. So in a lot of ways it is the sort of big 2017 movie for me, but in terms of doing a top 10 list, and these aren't necessarily my favorite movies, these are what I think are the best movies, I still think it is at number 4. So number 3, I'm kind of breaking a top 10 rule that I normally don't do, and I normally don't put a movie from the technical previous year, technically a 2016 movie, on my 2017 list, even if I saw it for the first time in 2017. And that's usually something newspaper critics do, like, well, it didn't play here until this year, so I counted it for that year and stuff. And that's sort of cute. I find it pretty obnoxious for the most part. But I kind of couldn't not put this movie on a top 10 list, and I think it deserves to. It definitely influenced me. The deep focus I did on Pauline Kael is very influenced by this movie, and it was a film that I watched twice, and both times I just think it's one of the best documentaries I've seen in a very long time, and I think it's one of the more important ones in terms of video essays and film essays. I think is probably one of the most important of those I've seen this year, and I've watched a lot of those, and that would be number 3 is I Am Not Your Negro. kind of a documentary, and it's not really trying to do the traditional kind of biopic type of a thing, but I think that is very appropriate for its subject matter and the person who this film is about, who is James Baldwin. It's more of a kind of philosophical documentary. It's not structured in the way we're used to in most documentaries. I often think that works very well for the message it's trying to do, how this film and its director really tried to present this with the words of James Baldwin more than anything else. That's what's front and center. And it's really putting James Baldwin at the forefront. There's no one more at the forefront of this than James Baldwin. And it kind of lets his amazing prose and his amazing points about racism and society, and even kind of some film criticism in there. It's often a very powerful film. It's a very striking film. It's a film that brings up issues that were both important then and are still kind of important now, and are still issues that we're dealing with now. And I guess the top two, I had a hard time deciding who would be two and who would be one. But number two is kind of a film that I knew was a really great movie. Right after I saw it, it became kind of the talking piece movie of the year, and I don't think you can really talk about this cinema year without talking about it. And number two is
Get Out. There's a lot that reminds me of kind of the cringe comedy of the 2000s and how uncomfortable it is to watch. Honestly, I had a hard time watching certain sections because it was so cringy. Much cringier than I think a lot of those were doing, but there's also a very much an honesty in that. Suburbia is a very scary place, and white people's inability to recognize the racial issues that are going on because they voted for Obama and probably would do it a third term are one of the many things to be scared of. Oftentimes with horror, what we fear is what we don't understand, and maybe what we don't understand with Get Out is why these people don't realize what they're actually doing. But Jordan Peele actually has even more in there, both doing a successful statement on race and making an incredibly good genre horror film. It shows how much of a promising horror filmmaker and a filmmaker in general he really is. What's interesting is, you have a lot of comedian filmmakers kind of emulating different styles. You look at the guys from Documentary Now, you look at what Lonely Island guys did in Popstar, and they actually have to master these genres to make fun of them. But I think Jordan Peele's the only one who went to the other side and actually made a straight horror movie understanding those tropes. Jordan Peele is really smart, and the fact that, for the most part, it plays like a genre film, and he uses that genre. He's like a very smart artist using that genre to say something more, and he knows how to play. He could do a straight horror film, and he could do a film about race, and melding them together to make something truly unique and different.
And the number one movie of 2017, at least according to me, is Lady Bird. I think there are certain films that capture moments in life, that show the transition of life and how life moves and evolves, and doesn't play in the way that we experience it, plays in more of our way of remembering it and our memories of it and the loose memories and identity that we get from those moments. And Lady Bird is that. It takes little moments of each of these times from the senior year of a girl named Christine, who goes by the name Lady Bird, which she gave herself. You see her go from the beginning of her senior year at a Catholic private school and the many different friends and experiences that happen throughout that year. It's almost perfection in terms of being an earnest coming of age film, the kind of coming of age film that people talk about when they want to make coming of age films. It just feels like that time. It feels like that senior year where you're discovering yourself. You know you're going to drive out of this town and you're going to say fuck you to everyone, and you can't wait to do it, but you also understand how much you love that town and you love your family, and you're going to miss them at the same time, and those conflicting feelings, and also that you're having sex, you're going to parties, you're doing all these new experiences. You have a lot more freedom because you're older and you're not exactly how to handle any of it, and not sure how to deal with your parents, and your relationship with their parents is all wrapped up into Lady Bird in such a beautiful, kind of wonderful way. Alright, so that was the best or top 10 movies of 2017. I feel pretty good about it, I'm hoping to maybe see more movies of 2018. We'll see. I hope you enjoyed this channel in the past year. I know it's been a crazy year in terms of content. It's been a crazy year personally, and it's been a just crazy year for the whole world being on fire and stuff. But I think we still got some cool movies, and I think this list shows that. I recommend seeing any of these. I know at least I Am Not Your Negro is free on streaming a lot of times, and it's on Amazon Prime, so you can check that one out. But there's a lot of this stuff you should check out. I recommend all of them highly. I recommend them highly enough that I list them over the other movies saw this year that weren't these, so that's something. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the reviews of the movies that I saw in 2017 and all the other ones too, maybe. If you would like to list what you thought were the best movies of 2017 or your own personal top 10 list, do so in the comments below. I always actually enjoy seeing what other people's top 10 lists are. It's always curious. And you can tell me what I should have left out. I'm sure you will, but you know, I'm sure there'll be a Baby Driver comment in there somewhere. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you for watching throughout this whole year. Comment below if you've seen any of these movies as well and what you thought of them that I put on this list, and subscribe if you would like to.